Friends, welcome to the one and only Rocket Channel. Now Joe Biden has started the press conference and answered questions about China, Taiwan and Hong Kong.
With regard to Xinjiang with the South China Sea and many other issues, despite pressure from you and from allies. The final language in the G7 communique does have some mentions of China, which is different from past years. But I know it's not as tough as you and your team wanted it to be. We saw a draft of the communique, and it's not quite as tough. So why isn't it as tough? There isn't very much action in it. There's some calls for China to be respectful. But why isn't that communique a little bit tougher? Are you disappointed in that? And what can you do to change some of these actions by China?
Well, first of all, I think it, as you know, last time the G7 met, there was no mention of China. But this time there is a mention of China. The G7 explicitly agreed to call out human rights abuses in Xinjiang and in Hong Kong, explicitly. 2, to coordinate a common strategy to deal with China non-market policies that undermine competition. They've agreed, and that's underway now, how to do that. 3, to take serious actions against forced labor in solar, agriculture, and the garment industries, because that's where it's happening, and they've agreed we will do that. To launch what I said earlier, I really feel very strongly. I propose that we have a democratic alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative, to Build Back Better, and they've agreed to that, and that's underway as the details of that. We agreed that we put together a committee to do that and come up with that. And thirdly, that we are going to insist on high standards for a climate-friendly, transparent alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. And but in the meantime, we're going to move forward. Look, I think it's always, let me put it this way. I know this is going to sound somewhat prosaic, but I think we're in a contest, not with China per se, but a contest with autocratic governments around the world, as whether or not democracies can compete with them in the rapidly changing 21st century. And I think how we act and whether we pull together as democracies is going to determine whether our grandkids look back 15 years from now and say, did they step up? Are democracies as relevant and as powerful as they have been? And I walked away from the meeting with all of my colleagues believing that they are convinced that that is correct now too. Not, I shouldn't say now, not just because of me, but they believe that to be the case. And so I think you're going to see just straightforward dealing with China. And again, we're not looking, as I've told Xi Jinping myself, I'm not looking for conflict. Where we cooperate, we'll cooperate. Where we disagree, I'm going to state it frankly, and we are going to respond to actions that are inconsistent. For example, we talked about trade. It's one thing to talk about whether or not our agriculture policy makes sense, and another thing to say, by the way, you're demanding that if I do business in your country, I've got to give you all my trade secrets and have the Chinese partner have 51% of that? No, not us.
So are you saying, Mr. President, are you satisfied with what came out in the
Yes.
communique, or did you wish it were tougher? Do you wish there was more action on China?
I think there's plenty of action on China, and there's always something that you can, I'm sure my colleagues think there's things they think they could improve that they wanted, but I'm satisfied. Steve Holland, Reuters.
The communique cited a variety of fronts on China, everything from human rights, the origin of the COVID virus, Taiwan. What do you think China needs to do to ease tensions?
I think China has to start to act more responsibly in terms of international norms on human rights and transparency. Transparency matters across the board. And I think the idea that, for example, one of the things I raised and others raised, I wasn't the only one who raised this at the G7, is that we don't know, we haven't had access to the laboratories to determine whether or not, I have not reached a conclusion because our intelligence community is not certain yet, whether or not this was a consequence of from the marketplace of a bat and interfacing with animals in the environment that caused this COVID-19, or whether it was an experiment gone awry in a laboratory. It's important to know the answer to that because we have to have access. We have to build a system whereby we can know when we see another lack of transparency might produce another another pandemic. We have to have access. The world has to have access. So we're trying to figure out at the G7 whether we could put together an international basis upon which we could have a bottom line with what the transparency accounted for.
And you mentioned that the argument behind the scenes, that you had not mentioned China in 3 years in one of these communiques. What did you argue behind the scenes to try to bring people to the point where they got?
To answer that question, there's no way to answer without sounding self-serving. Let me just say this. I just laid out what I thought was the need for us to be consistent, to protect our economies, and to see to it that other struggling economies who needed help got the help and were not held captive by other nations. But you might ask that to others. I'm not trying to be a wise guy.